Oh, and good evening. It's February 3rd, 2025, and we're continuing our discussion collection and our Outside the Class series. Remember, this series, it's from the Bible Project. It covers the entire TaNaK. It also knows the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. Those source videos are available for your review on TheDustyFeet.com in the Outside the Class section. Because the intent of Outside the Class would be to listen to that in-class lecture first. Those would be those short overview videos. We then expand the conversation. And these we try to keep to about 15 minutes. Make them easy to catch up on. So we're on a quest, scroll by scroll, book by book, a journey through this collection, maybe just with a fun and different twist. Our hope with the Dusty Feet is to foster discussion and to help build and support communities. If you're not already connected to a community or just want to share and interact, this community has 4 primary ways to interact. 1. TheDustyFeet.com. That's our primary place to find everything. You are always free to comment. 2. Substack. Link is in the description below. It's designed around the written and spoken text. It's a place to connect to ourselves and others. 3. Facebook at The Dusty Feet. These videos and other videos are also available for comment and discussion. 4. And as always, you're welcome to send an email to bob@thedustyfeet.com. These places, they will be moderated and guidelines will be set to ensure healthy, safe discussion. And as always on The Dusty Feet, this is a place where we can safely explore the endless ways of God and the interconnection of His creation. Belief understandings may be challenged, divine misunderstandings may exist, and traditional teachings might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love. Oh, and before we forget, if you do find these kinds of podcasts useful, it's when you click that subscribe button. The reminders, they're just there to help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, please, that is when you click that like button, because that is how YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. So remember, in this series, we're going to cover the entire TaNaK, right, that Old Testament. But we're going to do it in the original order of the Hebrew Scriptures. Remember, the videos we're going to be discussed, they're just the tip of an iceberg. They're part of an entire learning series I highly recommend, and all of them can be available on the Bible Project's website. Because we're going to ask many questions about all kinds of things. Answers, well, that's what we'll see. Samuel, Second Scrolls, are part 12. So I want to make one thing clear for myself. I do believe that everybody is still accountable for their own actions. We may suffer the fallout from someone else's actions, but our accountability remains our own. But I also find it interesting that God continues to choose to air dirty laundry. These stories of families that are wrapped around the biblical narrative, this human behavior, because we get to a part in chapter 13 where we're going to get to a section. Maybe we would ask, why this is even in the Bible? Why is this even a story we need to know? I mean, do we really need to know this story when you're thinking about, this entire greater biblical narrative? Because one of the parts that challenges, right, it's that very simple statement that we're going to get to. And it's one, I like this statement for the depth of its simplicity. Well, I'm not sure if those two words belong in the same sentence, but when you consider our collection of scrolls from Genesis to Revelation and all the scrolls in between, I'm going to leave each of the individual decide how that plays out, but all of these stories that bring us to a better understanding, possibly, of the Messiah. Maybe it's more about the why, but in that simple statement, it's a struggle to see how this story contributes to and expands the thought that it all leads to Jesus. And I think even though we say that, and I think it's a nice way to put things, I just think that phrase oversimplifies the complexity that really is this greater biblical narrative. As we mentioned last week, Skip notes that David's household is probably the most dysfunctional of all the leaders that Israel ever had. One might have a point in that with more wives And the more children you have, the greater the chance of this dysfunctional being, in fact, greater. Yeah? But we have a recording. It's in chapter 3 of Absalom's birth. It's his third son. It's from his wife Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. Remember that? Yet we don't see him enter the story, though, until chapter 13. It's when he's introduced as having a sister, a very beautiful one named Tamar. Also noted in that third chapter was the first son of David that was born. His name was Amnon. And as we're going to come to see, he was really not a good kid. And then under that, I think there's an underlying question that always seems to permeate when we get to stories like these. And I think that's the expectations of a father. Does it matter what kind of father David was? You know, we really just started a little section on the Dusty Feet about context, right? Why context? And when we talked about our tendency at times to tell stories and leave out things, and in that can create challenges. But in that, I mentioned details in stories. And I think what's interesting is even in that little phrase of details and stories, I think we realize really that so much of Scripture, so much of these stories, we really have very little detail about. So I think this really supports the idea that when we're leaving out the details that we do have, especially when we have so few in these stories, I think it's disingenuous to remove any part of them. So what kind of dad was David? Truthfully, that's a question that will have to be examined by forensic psychology, right, to determine what kind of dad David was. But without getting sidetracked, we have his son's behavior. And interspersed among this will be how David then handles the various life choices and these story interactions that actually play out. Because often in Scripture, we don't get enough information to know exactly where everybody fits in a particular timeline, right? How old these boys were in relation to, say, how old was David's first son from Bathsheba, that young infant that died, and then the time where we have Solomon born. These boys, they exist. We're just really not sure exactly how old they are at times in the stories, but we know that they're still at an age where, as we'll see, they can make some very disturbing life choices. Chapter 13, verse 1. Now it was after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon, the son of David, was in love with her. But Amnon was so frustrated on account of his sister Tamar that he made himself ill, for she was a virgin, and it seemed too difficult to Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very clever man. And he said to him, "Why are you, the king's son, so depressed morning after morning? Will you not tell me?" So Amnon said to him, "I'm in love with Tamar, the sister of my brother Absalom." And then Jonadab said to him, "Lie down on your bed, pretend to be ill. Then when your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Please have my sister Tamar come and give me food to eat. Have her prepare the food in my sight so that I may see it and eat it from her hand.'" This is the setup right out of a crime drama documentary, yeah? This is the story that's told to the jury. It's twisted. And we can suffice to say that they execute the plan. David fell into it, and Tamar ends up in his room. But I'm going to leave it to you to read the next section at the end of chapter 13, because it's really not something we should probably cover in this context. It's disturbing. And in my opinion, it falls in one of the darker chapters of this collection of stories. there's no excuse. There is no reason for Amnon to do what he did. And even at that time, there was a way to deal with this in Torah. This should have been handled in a certain way to deal with this egregious behavior. But again, as in a crime drama documentary, we have a brother who then now takes vengeance into his own hands. I think in this instance, it's not a good thing to say violence begets violence. Because just like in that crime drama, the brother of Tamar, Absalom, he waits 2 years to enact his vengeance, finally. And again, I want you to continue the end of chapter 13 to read the details of the story, because his act of vengeance, and in that, there's a bit of misinformation. I mean, it's funny when you read the story, you can almost see this actually played out in a modern context, any one of these crime stories. But even in this, Jonadab, David's brother's son, right, he tries to spread that misinformation, leave out a little detail. The whole reason? It was his suggestion to start with. So would that be guilt by omission or commission? That's food for thought. But as we get to the end of chapter 13, Absalom, after conspiring to kill his brother who violated his sister, and then decided to take vengeance into his own hands, well, he flees to Geshur. He flees to his in-laws. He figures it's a safe place to hide, and it is, right? He stays there for a little while, but eventually, as we get to chapter 14, Joab, in paying attention to the king, Joab, he's in with King David, and he realizes that he's actually missing his son Absalom. Okay, actually, in chapter 14, verse 1, it goes, "Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceives the king's heart was drawn towards Absalom." He missed him. So Joab works out a plan to get the king to decide this, right? We've seen this in a lot of our movies where somebody manipulates the story to make it look like they're the ones who came to this decision, this choice, yeah? And Joab does this with the help of a woman from Tekoa, right? She repeats the words that Joab told her to say. She tells David. And then in the story, then David goes, "Is Joab behind this?" And she finally says, "Yeah." So he calls Joab, and then he tells him, "Okay, go get him, bring Absalom home. But I want to make it very clear," right? In chapter 14 and verse 24, we get, "However, the king said, he shall return to his own house, but he shall not see my face." So Absalom returned to his own house, but he did not see the king's face. So David obviously is not happy with Absalom. And the next week, we're going to get into some more interesting details about Absalom. And there's a lot there. And I think this is really going to start to then ramp up this story between this son and his dad, King David. So thanks for with us tonight for another episode of Outside the Class with this second scroll of Samuel on the Dusty Feet.